and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for your time today. Thanks for joining online. I know it's like the world's hottest day. Thank you for being in person. We appreciate it. And so today we're going to be covering quantitative data and design decisions. And the reason that I wanted to cover this is because I know if you're like me, you've heard a lot lately about how people want to see numbers. They want to see, the numbers associated with your design. And that's a really difficult thing to do. We work a lot with qualitative data. And so it can be very difficult sometimes to, first of all, find quantitative data at all related to design. Secondly, to understand it. Thirdly, to be it, to direct your decisions and validate them. And so I want to talk about how to do that. The other reason that I wanted to bring this up today is because of the fact that, again, I'm not a data analyst. I don't have a background in statistics. So, but I still need to be able to use this data. And so many of us do. So no matter what your role is, I mean, if you have a background in statistics, you have a really wonderful advantage there. But if you don't, or if you just maybe want, a broader view of how to do this, that's what I'm to cover today, is make sure that everyone has the tools to use quantitative data in their designs. Oh, that's coming. See if it decides to work for me. All right, so I always start, anytime I do this conversation, I always start talking about the quantitative and the qualitative, and I know everyone knows this already, but it's always an important level set before we ever have this conversation. And so the quantitative is the what is happening at scale. So it's measurements, it's who, where, when, and usually it's testing or evaluating live experiences, something that is either it's a prototype, although that can be a little harder with quant, or it's live most of the time. And then you have the qualitative is why is that happening? Why are we seeing these effects at scale that we're seeing in the what? And so that's going to be more the feelings and opinions of your users. We're going to use a lot more descriptive phrases, and we're going to be testing usually designs or evaluating designs, something that's not out there where we can be pulling analytics from it. And of course, we have to use these together. So as we go through this, you'll find quite often that I blur the lines a little bit. There's going to be, well, this is quant, but it's also kind of qual, or you need the qual to understand the quant, or vice versa. So they really need to be used together as much as possible. So this is mostly a quant conversation, but there will be qual mixed in. All right, it does not want me to use that. Okay. So today we're going to be having two parts of this conversation. First will be the types of data, and we'll go into what they are, how they're used, where you find them, and then we'll go into how you actually apply the insights from that data to your design decisions. So we'll start off, we're going to talk about analytics, support data, population data. As before, everything is really blended together quite a bit. So you'll be like, wait, is that population data or is that analytics? It's both. So it'll jump around a little bit. I also have 3 projects that I'm going to showcase in here. I will jump from one to another to illustrate the point. And that's why I have these tags there to help you follow, hopefully, the thread of these projects throughout the entire presentation. So just to be clear, there's Conservation and Nursery Organization. For those of you who were at Prototype for the Planet, you'll recognize that. That's Borderlands. There's a health system. I guess you could call it a digital transformation. And then there's a telehealth platform. All right, so we'll start off with analytics, which is what we hope to have access to. Always make very good friends with the marketing folks, the SEO folks, the data analysts. We all want to make sure we're working really, really closely with them. But we'll get into immediately, what you can see about where your users are coming from. And so the first example we have here is we have what are the sources? Where are people coming from online? to land. In this case, this was the conservation and nursery site. So we wanted to know where were they coming from. And in this case, what you can see here is you have a lot of people coming from Google. Vast majority of people are coming directly from Google. Then you have the next after that is direct, which usually means that people are typing directly into, they're putting in this case, borderlandsnursery.org. They're typing directly in. And so I always advise everyone to be very cautious about direct. Direct will grab anything that is unsourced. So if you have an unattributed campaign, so let's say you have an email campaign or something else, but no one ever tagged it so that we could attribute it and say, hey, that's where this traffic is coming from, that will show up as direct traffic. So always take this one with a grain of salt. Be very careful because you really don't know necessarily where that's coming from. But it can also be helpful to help you uncover things like that. Discovering, hey, we have some unattributed traffic here. That can be a really important insight to help you understand your users a lot better. Then after that, there's a huge drop off. We see that in this case, there are 3 sister sites, and we see that one of the other sister sites is a major source of traffic, which is typical. We would expect that in a case where you have a single ecosystem with multiple sites together. But you would actually expect it to be a lot higher. You would expect to see a lot more cross traffic between these sister sites. And you'll notice that the other ones show up way at the bottom, or the last one shows up way at the bottom. So it doesn't appear that there's a lot of traffic coming from the sister sites. So that might be something that we want to then dig into qualitatively to understand why that's happening. And then we have a little bit of social traffic, but it's very, very low compared to Google. And everything else is usually, coupon sites and whatnot that we're not too concerned about. So this is important, is we know that almost all the traffic is coming from Google. People are literally searching for what they want in order to get here. So this is really critical. And then the other questions we want to answer, in addition to, of course, where the users are coming from, is also what might this suggest about them? And is there anything missing? So again, is there something that you expect to see here that you don't? Let's say your organization is actually making a significant marketing push on a social platform. You're going to expect to see that showing up a lot higher. And if it's not, then you're going to want to dig into the reasons why. What is happening that you're not getting the traffic from that source that you would anticipate? So again, always ask yourself there, is there anything that I'm expecting to see that I'm not? Is there anything I'm seeing that surprises me? This is not what I anticipated. Those are the opportunities to do the qual, to go with the quant so that you can understand what's happening. All right, jump ahead. So another thing that you might take a look at in your data is going to be geographic area that your traffic is coming from. This is usually, fairly available. If you have some traffic data, you should have this as well. You should be able to see from IP addresses where everyone is. And that's really helpful because even if you have a product that is available over a wide area, maybe it's available nationally, maybe it's available internationally, you're still going to see clusters usually in certain places. And so understanding geographically where your users are located is tremendously helpful, both in terms of making sure that you can meet the needs of those customers and also identify opportunities for geographic areas that you're not really pulling from that you'd like to see more traffic from those areas. So in this case, what we saw was, and to be clear for anyone who was not a prototype for the planet, Borderlands is located along the southern border of Arizona, so very far south. It's way down there. It's in a tiny little town called Patagonia. There's only like 800 people there, less than 1,000 people in this town. So it's very, very small. And so when you look at their users and where they're coming from, where these customers are coming from, we're seeing the mostly Tucson, mostly Phoenix, then Tucson, then Las Vegas. Phoenix makes sense because it's got the largest population, but Tucson unsurprisingly is also quite large, which is just because it's closer in this case. So these are the kinds of things that we would look at. Why is one higher or lower than the other? Do we have an opportunity to expand? So if Vegas, we wanted that to be a bigger market, then we might look into the demographics of Vegas and understand, all right, what are people coming for? And how can we appeal to that group? All right. Now we get into the fun stuff. I've said this before, these are the things I nerd out about. Search queries. And yes, there is additional context coming about how AI is affecting this because it is. But to start off with, search queries. So we already know most of the traffic is coming from Google, and this is true of most sites, but in this case, especially so. Most of the traffic is coming from Google. People are directly searching for what it is that they want, and ultimately, hopefully, landing on Borderlands. And so we want to know, what are the highest ranked search queries? So what's showing up the highest? And then what search queries are getting the most clicks? They're typically not the same. And there's a lot of information to be found there. So I'm going to start with keywords by rank. So this just says, hey, Borderlands in this case is ranked very, very highly for these keywords. If someone searches for this, they're going to show up in the top results, which is great. That's something you want. However, when you look at keywords by clicks, which indicates that someone's like, yes, that's what I want, boom, I'm going to select that. It's very different. They're not ranked as highly, but this is where people are going. And so these lists are not the same. So what we want to ask are, what are the patterns that we see in these two lists? So let's start with keywords by rank, and I'm going to ask the room and also online. So feel free to, shout out, drop in the chat, share, and let me know. What patterns do you see in keywords by rank?
I guess
Yeah,
more sale.
for sale.
Yeah,
Yeah. And would you say you don't see that as often in the clicks?
I guess not. I see a couple, but not as many.
Right, so it's not as dominant. I think that's accurate. So you see a lot of for sale. I think that's correct. There's one other pattern. Is there one other thing that we see repeated again and again here? Yeah.
A lot about seeds.
Seeds, correct. All right, so people want seeds. And this is interesting because if you look closely at the for sale, a lot of times it actually says plant for sale. So you can see you've got for sale, plant for sale, and seeds. So these are some patterns that we can see. Clearly, Borderlands is ranked for this. They're going to show up highly anytime people are searching that, but it doesn't seem people are searching for that as often, because if you go over to the clicks, the things that are actually driving traffic, those don't show up as much. There's some seeds, yes. There's like one or two for sales, but not a lot. Most of it is more just specific plant types that people are searching for. So this is really going to be helpful to us to understand, what is it that people are actually looking for? What is their intent? And that's really ultimately what search queries tell you, is what is the user intent? And especially if they click on something that indicates intent because they were looking for something and they think they found it, so they clicked. And so this is an expanded view of that, because I want to get into when you have user intent, then you look at where did they land when they clicked. That is their starting point in the journey. So this is where you can start to actually put together a user journey from the quantitative data. You can say, I can tell, what the user intent is, and I know where they're starting their journey. Now, we'll get into the other part of their journey. What happens after that? Do they stay? Do they leave? Where do they go in the site or whatever? And this works also, to be clear, this is still useful information even if you're creating a native app, because any kind of marketing experience is really sort of the first part of an application experience or a product experience. And so, so people are always going to interact first with some kind of marketing, onboarding, whatever, what have you, before they interact with the product. So it's important to keep these same concepts in mind, even if you're looking at a little more of a closed loop system. But in this case, yeah, so what you're getting here, intent, and hey, you're starting your journey here, that's gonna give you a lot of information to work with, and we'll come to how this goes. So now, we can also take a look at what keywords are driving most of your traffic and where are you potentially missing out. So you look at wins and losses. So you can see wins here, seeds and for sale actually do seem to be doing pretty well here, at least in terms of being, recent wins. But then if you take a look at some of the losses, places where we're really, dropping off, it's important to understand why is that happening? What is driving the interest or lack thereof in these keywords? I do want to point out that I looked up that Sotol plant there, and the reason that dropped off is because they actually that page has been removed. So that product is no longer in their inventory, and so that's why it dropped off like that. And so it's important, again, to start to dig into why are these patterns showing up? What might be the reason? And you can do that even before you go into conversations with users. So additional information about, what pages are getting the most traffic and is there overlap with also the biggest sellers. So this is where we start to create that link between traffic and sales, or traffic and revenue. And this is the stuff that always gets your stakeholders excited. That's what they want to talk about, is sales and revenue. So if you can make that link, it's really, really helpful. So here we can see, the pages that are getting the most traffic. Some of those category pages make a lot of sense. You would anticipate that would get a lot of traffic, but it's interesting that product pages are in the top 8 as well. So you have this milkweed and you have evergreen sumac, and I don't know how to pronounce the rest of that, but you have these 2 very specific types of plants that apparently are driving a ton of traffic. Very, very interesting. And then if you go down to the top selling products and services, you actually see that repeated. There's milkweed again. And then the evergreen sumac, it doesn't show up here, but there's Octio, which is related, velvet mesquite, a couple other things, the agave. We're gonna go into in a minute how these things are related, but you can see some of the patterns appearing here as well. Also, hydro seed and hydro seeding are showing up as 2 separate things here, but they're ultimately kind of one single service or product that you can see is really driving a lot of the sales and revenue here. So from that, we want to actually look at the pages. Now for today, I'm not going to dive into the pages themselves. I'm going to give you what I found when I went to these pages so that you can understand what we're pulling from this here. So when you go to these pages and you read the descriptions and you look at these, you'll find things like this is good for it's drought resistant, or it's good for erosion control, or it's supports pollinator populations. So butterflies, hummingbirds, other pollinators. And these are themes that you see repeated in these exact plants over and over again. So these are the pages that are getting all the traffic, that are driving all the sales, and they have repeating themes. And so that's just to give you an idea. So when I say, what might we infer about user priorities from these pages? It's going to be those. It's going to say, well, we think that users care about supporting pollinator populations, drought resistant plants, and erosion control. These are really important to that. And that helps us understand how we might then appeal further to that population. So I also want to mention briefly, I have a question here about what is observable about the CTAs on these pages. I am actually going to go, you know what, I will go ahead and go to this page, assuming it works. Might not let me. Nah, it's not. Oh, it is. Nah, we'll go back. My bad. We'll stay here. It doesn't, it's gonna give me too much trouble if I try to go there. But what I can tell you, and there is an image of it later on, what I can tell you is that in some cases, there are no CTAs. or they're very, very buried in the content and in the body copy. So it's just like kind of a little hyperlink down there. It's hard to see. Often it's not above the fold in some cases. So there's a lot of places where, again, just kind of looking at these pages, you can start to understand why they might not be converting the way that we would hope, and that why we're not seeing that in the data. So gonna go back here again. So with that additional information about these high traffic, big sellers, we've actually looked at the pages, we have a better understanding of what's going on there. We can now actually see them showing up in those keywords by clicks. We're getting people searching for evergreen sumac. We're getting people searching for the Octio plant. For sale shows up twice there, milkweed, respirans. And so these are showing up repeatedly, and we're seeing, okay, you can start to build a narrative of, we know what users are looking for, and we know how they're searching for it, and we know where they're landing when they do. So we're starting to build that whole story. So now we'll jump to another project that illustrates the same thing and show how we use this information a little differently. So this was for an AI symptom checker, and the hospital system was really proud of it, but it wasn't quite getting the traffic they were hoping for. So they really wanted to increase traffic, because the ultimate goal here was to increase the appointments booked, which is where the revenue comes from. And so the idea was, how can we increase organic traffic to this symptom checker? So first we just popped into, again, don't look at any of the symptom checker stuff to start off with, just overall traffic to the site, look for where are people coming in. And what we found was, when people searched for symptoms or conditions that would be a good candidate for the symptom checker, they were landing almost exclusively on article pages. It was an article about, hey, if you have this symptom, here's what it might be. Or, hey, do you want to know more about this condition because you think you might have it, or maybe you've just been diagnosed? Hey, here's some more information. This is an article written by one of our doctors, and that kind of, and they were landing on these article pages. And so from what we could tell, if their intent from these queries was, I want to understand these symptoms and conditions, then their journey was starting on these article pages. And so that's enough information for us right there to start building a path to where we want them to go, which is the symptom checker, because they're very natural candidates for that. And we could also see overlap between things that they were searching for and things that we knew were frequently suggested or recommended by the symptom checker. So again, very clear alignment there. So some other metrics you want to keep an eye on when you're doing this are going to be bounce rate. So if someone comes into your page and leaves immediately. Click-through rates. Time on page, but I do want to mention that I'm not always super convinced by that one. It's a popular one in terms of being, if it's high time on page, it means your content is engaging. And that's great, but a lot of people aren't necessarily searching for engaging content. So a lot of times people are just trying to do an activity as quickly as they can. So in this case, if you need to book an appointment and you don't want to sit there and read a bunch of stuff about it, you want to book your appointment. So it's important to kind of take this one with a grain of salt. Time on page can be a valuable metric, but it doesn't always mean what we think it means. So then we have internal page referrals or paths. You want to understand where are people coming from within the site or application so that you know what their path is. This is really particularly important when people are going back a lot, because that doesn't always show up as a bounce rate. It just shows up as, all right, well, you're being sourced from another page within the experience. But from our perspective, we go, that's a person going backwards in the experience. Why is that? Why are they not moving toward the conversion point that we've planned for them? So those internal paths are really important. Then we also have traffic over time. We wanna see patterns that are seasonal, weekly, monthly, daily. If you have a steady increase or decrease, you wanna try to understand the reasons for that, and anomalies. So when you see those weird spikes in, the data over time, you wanna understand, why is that happening? Is this just a fluke? Does it drop because there was an outage or something like that? You wanna understand, what is the reason, or is there another thing driving that spike? And so this is an example of that, which I really love. Same project here, this is still the symptom checker project, and we had the opportunity to look at the completed assessments over time. So these are people who got into the symptom checker and finished it. And, we saw some patterns. We said, it looks like there's a weekly pattern here. End of the weekend, we tend to see higher usage. And we theorized that maybe that's people who, they got sick over the weekend and they're not sure if they need do I need to go to urgent care, the ER, can I wait till Monday to book my appointment? They're not sure. And so they go, okay, well, I'm gonna do the symptom checker to tell me, what is the level of care that I need right now? And so that was what makes sense to us. But what's really, really interesting was that the spikes we saw could be specifically aligned with holidays. President's Day, Easter, Memorial Day. And so it was very apparent that more people were using this on holidays, and that makes sense. The medical offices are closed, they can't get the care they need, and so they want to understand, what are my options for taking care of myself at home, or do I need a higher level of care? Do I need to get my butt to the ER? So this is what people want to understand. So this helped us not only understand their instinctual flow, but also, what are some good opportunities for campaign integration? If we know there's a holiday coming up, and we're probably gonna see more people using this, how can we make sure that we're prepared to get that influx of people and make sure their needs are met? How can we make sure that we get them both to the care they need, and also, hey, we want to see those appointments booked that we're hoping for? All right, and I promised I would mention this, so here we are. This is really critical. So while everything that I just shared with you about analytics, specifically search, is true, it is changing. It is changing because of, about a year ago, the AI overview on Google was launched. Plus, people are using, obviously, a lot of other AI tools as well. And so AI summaries and AI overviews are changing the way that people use search. So you're getting 60% of Google searches last year never left the search engine results page. So people are searching, looking at the AI result, and then not clicking on anything. They got their answer, or they think they did. Of course, it's not accurate half the time, but the point is that they're satisfied with the answer that the AI gave them, and so they are not clicking through. So this is huge, and so that goes to that 30% decrease in click-through rates on Google. And obviously, this is a huge problem, because it's all well and good if your content shows up in the AI summary, but if no one clicks, you don't get any benefit from that. So it's a real concern. And then you also have a 7 times increase in the Google search queries that use 8 words or more. So instead of just having these little snippets, so like, for example, the keywords we saw earlier, it was just a few words, like 2 or maybe 3, 4 words in most cases. And in this case, you're looking at 8 or more. People are writing full sentences. So instead of saying, in the case we saw before, Octio plant, it's, where can I buy an Octio plant? Today, right? Things like that. So you're getting a lot more of that now. And so we really have to adapt to this, and I'll get into how we do that a little bit later. Okay, so now support data. All right, so support is a place a lot of people don't really think to look, because we sort of just think of it as like catching users who fall through the cracks, but it's actually one of the places that we potentially can have the greatest impact, especially through an understanding of the quantitative data. So if you have the opportunity to talk to customer support or gain access to their analytics, whatever, you want to look for things like, what are the most common issues reported? Issues by severity, so P1, P2, how serious are these? And how frequently are they happening at that level of severity? Average time to resolve an issue, how long does it take to fix it? So someone calls with an issue, or they talk to the chatbot, or they do whatever, opens a ticket, how long does it take to close that ticket? It's really important. And then the cost per issue, which is based on the time to resolution. So what this means is that you can determine how much support effort is going to that issue by looking at how frequently is it happening and how long does it take to resolve. Those two facts will give you the sort of total, total time or cost for resolving these issues. So an example that I have here, and this is from a telehealth platform support, and they had some resolutions, which is how they sorted their ticket types. And so the resolution here was they called in a missing prescription. And what you can see is the way there's kind of an inverse relationship here. You have calling in a missing prescription is by far the most frequent issue that people experience. But it takes very little time to resolve compared to everything else. You can also see the transferring a prescription to a new pharmacy. That doesn't happen with anywhere near the frequency that calling in a missing prescription does, but it is also taking longer. So it's funny because it looks like it's not a big deal from here, but wait till you see what happens when we calculate cost. So as I said, we see less frequent issues take longer to resolve. That can result in greater delays. So in this case, what we found was that even if these issues are not happening as often, they're gonna involve a lot greater delays for the consumer. So this could really be driving consumer dissatisfaction if it takes a long time to fix, even though it's not necessarily happening at a large scale. And vice versa. So this is really important. If something's happening frequently, but it's getting resolved quickly, then maybe that's not as big of a concern for the organization because it's not representing a huge cost for them. And so, as I mentioned, if you multiply the frequency of the issue to how long it takes to resolve it, that's going to give you the total support costs by resolution. So you can see that here. So again, calling in a missing prescription, that clearly is taking up most of the support effort. Half of the support effort is literally just that issue. But if you take a look at transferred to a new pharmacy, which I pointed out before, it seemed like it was lower relatively. It's still a pretty big chunk. It's 18%. So this is just really helpful in understanding, where is all that support effort actually going? Where do we have the opportunity to reduce it with improvements in the design? So from that, we came to a conclusion that those missing prescriptions, yes, it's definitely the biggest issue, but we don't really have a lot of options for addressing it. We don't think that we'll be able to target it closely, and we're not sure that we'd be able to measure it very well. So it's not really a good candidate for us to try to impact that, at least at the design level. But on the other hand, that transferring the prescription to a new pharmacy, we think we can probably resolve that in a more quantifiable way. There's an experience defect, we're like, it's a usability defect, we're like, I think we can fix that, and we could probably reduce that to where it's virtually nothing. So these are the kinds of things you look for, like, where are the opportunities to have that quantifiable impact? If you don't have access, or you want to the analytics, or you want to supplement that information, you can always check reviews. Review sites are great for this. Granted, if they're not super accurate in terms of being scaled, because obviously most people only go online to complain. So it's important to take it with a grain of salt, but it can help you find those pain points and opportunities for improving support. So in this case, we had a lower rating for Borderlands. And in this case, someone said they were confused by sale. They thought it meant on sale, not for sale. And there's a subtle difference there because it's a question of whether there was a sale at one discrete time when something was available, or whether something is always for sale and available at all times, and that caused some confusion. And of course, this is interesting to us because now we pair that with the quantitative data that showed the users coming in using for sale to search for their plants, and you can start to see how this happens. So it's really, really helpful. Another thing, which I don't really have an example of, but I wanted to call it out, is contact form submits. If you have a contact form on your site or in your application, especially sales contact, so anytime contact sales obviously is the holy grail of the marketing pipeline. And so if you have something like that, it's not unusual for people, if they're having an issue and they can't find the support they need, then they fill out a contact form and they put their support issue in there. So sometimes, and I was in on one project where we were getting, I forget the number, I want to say it was like 30%, but it was just a lot of those incoming sales contact forms that had comments that indicated it was actually a support issue. So they weren't going to the right place, they were gumming up the sales pipeline. It was creating some real issues, and we were losing time trying to resolve this and get these sorted to the right place, make sure people got what they needed. So that's another place where you can find good information like that. Then you can also look at the FAQ. Again, that's maybe not as reliable in terms of being information directly from users, but usually FAQ are created from actual frequently asked questions that people have. So they do reflect support issues quite frequently. So taking a look at that, seeing what kinds of issues or questions are coming up often from your customers, and importantly, what options are provided to resolve that. So if we go back to this example of people filling out the contact form, they're doing that because they can't find another way to get support. So we need to know, what kind of options are we giving them to resolve this? Are there good self-service options? Can they contact support easily? Is, the phone number, the chat bot, all the things, how easy is it for them to do that? So, for example, one way that we resolved this was, all we did was take the support link, which was hidden in a menu, and we just pulled it out and made it a little more discoverable. And that took care of that whole problem we were having with the contact form. So all of a sudden, we weren't getting those support requests via the contact form anymore because people were able to find support much easier. So a lot of times, very small changes can really help you impact that. I also have a question here, because we could look at the page, but some of the answers are hidden behind a click. It's like an accordion style for the FAQ. And I just want everyone to always consider, are you potentially going to have more issues helping people resolve their support issues if things are hidden behind a click? There's not really an answer there. I think you can make arguments both ways, but that's the type of thing you think about when you're looking at this data. All right, then we move into population data. All right, so first thing you might ask is, wait a minute, is this analytics? Yes, again, analytics and population data, there's a lot of overlap, but what we had was, this is going back to the symptom checker, and so we were seeing who was using the symptom checker and how, and so we're seeing 73% women in this example. And then also, if you look at the age here, we have easily almost the majority are people under 39. So generally skewing a lot younger here as well. I'm not going to focus on the other ones as much, but they do show things like, for example, bottom right corner, you can actually see what time of day people are logging in. That can be really helpful too when you're trying to create that mental model of, hey, what is this user experiencing and what is leading them to log in and do this? Are they doing it on their lunch break, which might be happening here based on the time, or are they, doing it early in the morning because they want to get an appointment in the afternoon, whatever the case may be. And sometimes you'll see spikes overnight as well, not here, but I've seen cases where, again, someone gets sick overnight, and so then they're just looking for options for care before the office is open. So, but in this case, what you can start to see, again, that gender and age breakdown, and start to go, okay, So what do we need to understand about the population in order to make sure that, once again, we're going to be sure to serve these customers and target them as necessary? Or again, if we have gaps, if we want to maybe increase that share of men who are using the product, what might we need to do to make that happen? The other thing that you do is compare it with publicly available data. So in this case, I pulled a study of symptom checker users this was actually conducted in Germany, but it was really interesting to see how the numbers that we saw were also reflected in this study, which indicates they're probably fairly stable. That's going to be true across the market. So this is how you help understand, kind of benchmark your own quantitative data and know, is this typical or is this unusual? And I need to understand why ours is different. So in this case, it being mostly female and much younger was also predominantly female, younger than average. So it's definitely consistent. So back to the telehealth platform. One thing that I'm sure a lot of people have heard about this, that there are now healthcare deserts happening in the same way that food deserts are happening, so rural hospitals are closing and things like that. So a lot of people are hearing a lot about this right now. And one of the effects of that is that there is more of an incentive to try telehealth, because if you don't want to drive 2 to 3 hours to get to your nearest clinic or hospital, you might try telehealth. But there are additional problems that are introduced by that, and understanding the data can help us get visibility into that. So I'm going to start with, if you look at this, this graph here, you can see it's looking at rural population by age. And while, of course, this younger group is the largest group, you can actually see that if you look at that 65 and over, it grows for the rural population. So it is a larger share of the rural population than the non-rural population. What it means is that in a rural area, more of the people are seniors, are older adults, than in a non-rural area relative to the population. So this helps you kind of understand who lives in those areas and what are their needs. An older user has very different needs and limitations than a younger user. So this will drive us to create different designs for that population. Furthermore, another issue in rural areas is that the rural communities might not have good high-speed internet access. So maybe our really fancy animation that we have in our applications don't really work for those people, or if the load times are too slow or anything like that, anything that's performance based is going to potentially create a barrier for people in these areas. So these are things, again, looking into the publicly available data, we can make reasonable assumptions that will affect our design. Okay, so popping back over to the conservation borderlands example, remember I mentioned that they were located in Patagonia, population 882, very small. I always bring this up because, and I'd like everybody to bookmark this if you can, it's datausa.io. It's really, really valuable. I use it in basically every single product I do. And again, this is true even if your target area is very broad, you're still going to have geographic clusters, and this is how you dig into those. It's really wonderful. Like, it's so much demographic data. It's all based on the census. It's all really up to date. So it's really, really wonderful and very helpful to understand. So I really recommend it, definitely looking at, and you can go into specific areas. So if you're concerned about education or healthcare or anything really, it's all in there. So in this case, I pulled a little bit of detail because I think it's really interesting and it shows the sort of insights that can come from this sort of data. So we see employment by industry, and you've got a lot of the agriculture, forestry, fishing, mining, quarrying, and gas extraction. This is really important because as a conservation group, they're constantly trying to work against one of the largest industries in their area. So it can be very challenging for them. Then we have rent versus own in terms of people who home ownership. And the reason I pulled this is because firstly, it's so far off the the numbers that we see for the rest of the state and for surrounding areas. And also it's a significant drop, and anytime you see something like that, typically means something is happening, so. Don't necessarily know the reason why homeownership dropped off so dramatically here, but it would be a really good thing to dive into and to understand. Then we have car ownership, and I pulled that one just because I've never seen an example like this where 3 cars is the standard. And so I asked this question before, but I want to just ask everybody, can we think of a reason why 3 cars would be standard in this tiny little town? Yeah.
If you're in agriculture, you need trucks and stuff.
Exactly, yeah, it's likely trucks, tractors, all the things, everything they need for farming and other similar purposes, so. I think that's a great example, but it's just really unusual because that's not typical here at all. And then if we compare that to Phoenix, which obviously has a much larger population, you can still see some things. So the agriculture, forestry, and fishing, and the mining, quarrying, et cetera, that is still there, but it's a much smaller part of the population. So not nearly as many people. So if that was the only customer base, you would be a little concerned because it's just it's not a large group to target. And so fortunately, that's not the only customer base, but it's important to know anyway. And then we look at that renting versus owning. And part of the reason I pulled this as well is because if you're trying to sell plants, even if you're doing it for conservation purposes, some of your most obvious customers are going to be homeowners and the people who are trying to beautify their home, or maybe again, that erosion control, they're concerned about their land, whatever the case may be. And so they're reasonable customers. And so that's why we look at rates of homeownership here. Another thing I always recommend is, again, going back to pairing the quant and the qual together. I recommend checking out what is the social media where your population hangs out, especially local. So a lot of times, there's local Facebook and there's local Instagram and there's local whatever. I like Reddit for this purpose because it gives you so much insight. So this literally came from, I found Reddit threads by Arizona landowners. There are subreddits specifically for Arizona landowners. And so I could go in there and look at what were the problems they were having, what are the questions they have, what are they trying to solve? And of course you have this one about erosion, so that's consistent with what we know the business is trying to do, so it's really helpful. It makes this a reasonable group to target. Conservation easement, and then just general plants and landscaping. And here this person says foolproof options, but in the area where they're located, that means drought resistant, erosion control, and pollinator supporting. So it's really helpful to be able to have that information to pair with your data. All right, I'll pause 1 second. So that is all the types of data and how you can draw insights from those. So what we're going to do now is go into how we can actually use that in the design process. Time check, how are we doing?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, I can do this. I can do this. I won't keep you guys for long. All right, so gonna go into how we use it in readout hypotheses, outcome-based design, and measuring impact. All right, so when you're preparing your readout and creating some hypotheses for your stakeholders, you want to look at all of your sources and understand which of the metrics do you have that are actually going to affect your decision. So it's going to be the ones, what are your pivot points? What are the ones where, hey, this insight is going to drive my decision making and I expect to see a change or an improvement or whatever based on this. So it's everything we already talked about, plus marketing trends and things like cart abandonment rates. So there's a lot of good stuff there, but all the things we discussed. And then you're preparing your hypothesis. And the reason that we recommend doing this is because this really helps kind of frame what you're saying you're going to do for your stakeholders, because obviously stakeholders just like hit better, make line go up. And so in order to set yourself up for success, it's helpful to create a hypothesis, which is to say that if you make this change that we have recommended, and if you're in a UX researcher role, you're probably going to be less prescriptive and just say, we think that with some targeted changes we can affect this. And if you're in a design role, you might be a little more prescriptive and say, hey, here's the specific change that we recommend you make in order to see this difference. But if you make these changes that we recommended, then you're gonna see this result. And then you offer metrics to measure that. In this case, we say, hey, if you introduce these call outs where we recommend, that's gonna lead to increased usage of the symptom checker. Only the first metric there is actually directly measuring the hypothesis, which is, visits to the symptom checker page. That's really critical because while all these other metrics are really important, especially because they can lead to that appointments booked, which is what we know matters to the stakeholder, we don't want to commit to saying we'll increase appointments because we can't necessarily affect that. There's so many other things that happen between traffic to the page and appointments being booked that you don't want to commit to changing that metric. You just want to say, we're going to track it. We recommend you track it, and then we'll see. But the only one we're committing to changing is the visit to the page. Same thing is true, we talked a little bit about CTAs here. If you improve the CTA here, you can expect to see hopefully an increase in visits to the seed lab page. That might lead to an increased click-through rate and potentially increase in sales for seed lab services. Then if we move into outcome-based design, what you're looking for is not necessarily just the conversion point. You don't necessarily just want to say, hey, we're going to increase clicks, or we're going to increase, the sales revenue, whatever. That's all great. But ultimately, for user-centered design, you want to look at what are the outcomes for the user? What are they trying to achieve with this? What's going to be the result for them? And so in this case, the example we have is that the user doesn't want to find an Arizona milkweed or buy an Arizona milkweed. They want to own an Arizona milkweed. They want to have it, right? And then whatever benefits they anticipate from that, that's what they would get. But that's the outcome for them, is actually having it. Everything else is the experience leading there. So yeah, they're expecting a benefit, presumably from increased pollinator populations. And so from that, we might write a jobs to be done statement. So in this case, we might say, I want to purchase a locally indigenous plant so that I can increase pollinator populations. That's not necessarily something they would say, but it helps us frame their intended outcome. Then we take the goal of that, we set it as the end point of the user flow. We'll show this in a second, but we say the goal is to plant my new Arizona milkweed with confidence. That's the end of their experience. And then you say, at the beginning of their experience, what is that common Google search that we see? In this case, it's Arizona milkweed. Great. That's the starting point of their journey, is that search. And now you just are building the path between them. Some general tips for crafting a jobs to be done user flow include things that occur outside of the web or app experience. So sort of offline steps, so to speak, or maybe looking at other sites. The travel to and from a location, it's delivery timelines, that kind of thing. Consider lateral paths. Definitely try to provide multiple paths. Not everyone follows the same path, and so they need multiple opportunities to ultimately reach their outcome. And highlight conversion points. This includes micro conversions, so like newsletter signups, which gradually help people become more invested and then ultimately convert and become a sale. And I always recommend limiting the edge and error cases for your first pass. Again, so you can see what was happening here is we identified the most likely path to the symptom checker because we knew where they were starting. So what was their initial search, what page were they landing on, and what was their intended outcome. So then from that, we just had to build in these CTAs in between so that they could reach that. This is what that ultimately looks like. And then these are some examples of the CTAs that we designed so that they could be placed throughout the site and get people to where they needed to go. And now we come back to how AI is changing all of this and what we can do about it. So everyone knows SEO, search engine optimization. And in response to AI search, we now have answer engine optimization. And the idea is that it's optimized about answering people's questions that they are inputting into either Google and then getting an AI result or ChatGPT or whatever the case may be. So some steps you can do to resolve this are to use AI-friendly schemas to organize content. These are FAQs and how-tos. Again, if someone's already phrasing, how do I, or where can I, or whatever, if someone's already phrasing something like a question, then there are existing schemas that answer those questions. We use those because they're familiar and they can, they have specific markup that will help the search engine identify them. So then we have the writing and organizing content in a Q&A format. So the content should be crafted as a standalone response to an actual query. So as much as possible, rather than being, you know, a long, like, paragraphs and articles and everything, you want to make sure that if someone could extract just a single sentence, that that would answer their question as much as possible. So we'll do that. And then we have including authoritative context, including names, publications, and recency indicators, dates usually, to demonstrate relevance. This is really important now that, you know, there's so many issues with the accuracy of AI. It does tend to place a lot of emphasis on authority. So as much as you can provide any indicators of authority, this is really, really critical, and indicating that it's recent, that it's up-to-date information. That's also going to really help, you know, help that get sorted. And then lastly, making the content actionable. So including CTAs in context, that's going to increase the likelihood that the user will actually click through. And this is also important because we already know that people don't necessarily leave the Google results page if they're getting the answer that they need. So the only way they're going to actually click through is if they can take action to solve their problem. So as much as you can provide that action in context, that increases the likelihood that they'll actually click and that you'll, you know, have an opportunity to convert. Lastly, measuring impact. In this case, quantifying the qualitative. I really recommend from the Microsoft Desirability Toolkit, there are product reaction cards. I really, really love these because you can put them in a survey, you can put them into any of your usability studies, whatever you've got. It'll really, really help you kind of collect sentiment in a way that is quantifiable for your stakeholders. So this is super, super helpful because sometimes the you know, the quotes don't hit as hard as we want them to. And so having this quantitative data can really, really help. So definitely recommend that. The way that I've used that before is I inserted it at the end of a usability test, and I selected words. Basic best practices, make sure you select an even number of, or an equal number rather, of positive and negative, or positive, neutral, and negative, to make sure you're not introducing bias. Make sure you randomize it. If you can randomize it in the tool, great. If not, use a separate randomizer tool to do it before you build the study. And just make sure you, again, remove as much bias as you can. But if you have people select, you know, what are the 3 terms that you would use to describe this, then you can get some really great feedback. In this case, it was wonderful because it was all positive, but in cases where it's not positive, it can really help you understand, you know, what are some opportunities to improve this. And then you can also pair that with the qualitative by anything that people volunteer as a statement and they repeat it. That's a good example of like, okay, well, that's a term that they're using to describe this. So that can be really helpful. And lastly, so we go back to that example that we saw of the symptom checker. We launched it 11 weeks later. We compared it to the previous 11 weeks. So it's not really an A/B test because they're not running at the same time, but we were comparing our before and after previous 11 weeks after launch. And we can see an increase in all the metrics that we wanted to see, which is fantastic. But my favorite was that we saw a new record set for assessments completed in a day. So given what we saw about how it was holidays where we saw the biggest spike, And given that this was launched, looks like a little after early July, it looks like, mid-July maybe. Where do you see that big spike? Answer, it's Labor Day. So, you can see it there, September 1st. So, that was very exciting for me. So I was like, oh, look, the pattern we saw, it's showing up at scale after we increased everything. So that was really exciting. And the last thing I'll mention is that we do always go in and look at those page sources to ensure that, yes, that new traffic is actually coming from our new CTAs, which it was. Alright, so just to summarize everything, look for patterns, create a qualitative research plan based on your quantitative data. You can use support data to find pain points. Look for population data overlap. What can you see in your data that is reflected in the broader population? Identify a hypothesis and success metrics and use outcome-based design practices. Cool. All right, so I went a little over, but thank you everybody for your time. Helpful, any questions?
It's just a general question. First of all, it's really great, and I've never been to one of these before. It's my first time. I think you're amazing. And I was curious, in your group, are there subgroups? I work in higher ed, and I was curious if there are any, like, I don't know, sort of subgroups of UX people in higher ed through your.
I mean, there are definitely people that focus.
Like,
Yeah,
I just came here to sort of, might be let me out of work, although I have to have that. Because I know my boss is like slacking me down, I'm not there. So, but like I was curious about UX designers in the Boston area and higher ed. I was just interested in meeting this, my first, like, I was like, I'm gonna go in person, I'm leaving the office and meeting with them. So, but this was amazing, so thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, we don't have like subspecialties within our group, but I know some groups that are working in higher ed, like NERCOM or learning experience design groups that I can recommend to you.
Okay, I don't know, I'm sorry, my name's Lisa, I don't know if you're all.
I'm Kieran, I'm the leader of the.
So if I somehow go to the meeting invite, I'd be able to message you back, because I probably should run back.
Yeah, sure, or I can
Alright.
shoot you a LinkedIn.
Okay, that's cool, and I'm Lisa Link, like the missing link. That's also, that's actually my name.
That's
So,
fantastic.
this is why I told my husband that's why I married him, it was only for the.
Just for the name.
For the email address.
I know, my husband's name is Rude, so I got that name.
Anyway, another question?
Yeah, so I see the idea around putting like in context CTAs on the page and stuff, but if the problem is a lot of the traffic isn't going because of the the AI summaries, how do you solve that? It seems like the in context CTA won't show up in the AI summary, right?
It won't show up in the summary, but it will actually, it affects the ranking and the likelihood that they actually, in this case, Google actually pulls from your site or that page, because it's gonna say, this is actionable content. I see in, the semantic structure of the page that there's a CTA here. Plus the CTA is labeled also as an answer to the question. And therefore, I'm going to prioritize this content. So what it really is more than anything is it's a way of getting the content prioritized. So yeah, it won't show up in the summary. But then if people choose to click through, it'll be like, oh, this can solve my problem. So it doesn't totally solve the question of people not leaving the results page. But it does improve the visibility. And again, it's always good to have your content be actionable.
Just to follow up, is there anything specifically Google's doing to determine that that's an actual CTA or it's labeled an answer or anything like that that someone needs to pay attention to? Or is it just, Google can tell kind of thing, it's in the background that it's in the HTML or anywhere?
Yeah, so that's a really good question for someone who has a much better understanding of HTML than I do, but yes, my understanding is, and if you search answer engine optimization, There are a lot of excellent articles that answer that exact question, that actually give you the exact recommended markup for everything. So they go into a great amount of detail, and you can see exactly how to structure all of your content and your CTAs and everything in order to give it the best opportunity to, to be both ranked and clicked. Yeah.
You find good articles, but sure, because we do a lot of contact forms, I was just thinking,
Yeah.
but that was, you actually asked my question, which I probably should run back down to.
Mhm. Not bad.
Contact forms, which aren't exactly like a formal CTA in a paragraph, but they're on every program pages, and that's like our main, we want them to click and apply, or
Mhm.
like through the contact forms,
Yep.
universities, for the programs,
Yeah,
so how to mark those up better.
yeah, well, and CTA best practices still apply, so in that case, I think it's usually recommended 3 fields or less in order to, to increase conversion. So, trying to have more than 3 fields in a contact form, which doesn't mean that you couldn't have like another contact form deeper in, it does have more fields, but if you're talking about the places that are being, that we're hoping people land, the landing pages, fewer fields is better.
Oh my god, I'm gonna tell this to.
Yeah.
An onboarding document back and forth.
Yeah, no
But that
worries.
is- It's so nice, thank you,
Yes.
thank you. Have a nice
You
day,
too.
everybody.
We have one question in the chat, and one person with a hand raised.
Okay, cool, sounds good.
Yeah, we can start with the chat, but Craig said, I've been away from traffic tooling for a few years, but with AI and other changes, how are the current tools at highlighting patterns worth repeating?
Sorry, I wanna make sure I understand this question, so. Which was highlighting patterns worth
I can ask or highlight or refine it if you want.
explained, sorry. Go ahead.
So we're looking to implement something like open telemetry. And I just remember in the early days of doing web traffic pathing and analysis, there was just a lot of manual work that needed to be done. And with AI and other things, I'm really hoping that it can highlight, hey, here's some weird anomalous things that you might want to tackle, just some patterns that it should know because, that we're not that unique.
Yeah, so there's definitely, I can definitely say that a lot of personalization tools actually do that. So a lot of personalization tools have AI built into them, and they are designed to do exactly that, and to recognize the patterns, to know, and then to be able to adapt, to increase traffic. So I would definitely, for that, I would look into those more than anything else.
Cool.
Yeah, sure.
One more,
Yes.
David, if you wanna go.
Hi, yeah, no, I was wondering, I was looking at the Borderlands site, and I noticed that there were like several different pages for the shop, or for shopping. And so, instead of like having one central page that has just like the seeds, and then the cacti, milkweeds, etc., they're dispersed over multiple pages. And I was wondering, like, if you knew, like, if there's an advantage to that, but also like if that somehow like affects the analytics, or maybe causes like some of them to go unseen, or like how that maybe could affect people who are like casually browsing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that, some of the recommendations that came out of the workshop for Borderlands did include updating their IA to be, a lot more streamlined, and to really be kind of a single structure, rather than, to your point, kind of disjointed. There's a lot of redundancy across the site. And yes, those are problems. It creates issues in the metrics, because you're going to, like, remember when we saw hydro seed and hydro seeding, and those were showing up as 2 separate things? Like, that creates a problem, because you're not really getting the accurate reflection of, what that means for the business. And so it is important to integrate, to streamline as much as possible, and to structure as much as you can. So in terms of an advantage to, especially with SEO and now AEO, there is an advantage of having supporting content. That's always a really important thing. You don't necessarily want your content to be standalone too much or to be too separated from related content. As much as you can have related content in a clear hierarchy, so category levels, and with additional cascading detail. And as much as you can have, again, that's almost I hesitate to say pyramidal, but just a very clear structure of supporting content with increasing detail, that is going to rank better because that's authoritative. And this is where we get back to the idea that authority in your content really, really increases how much it is prioritized by the search engine. So it can be really good. I would say that Borderlands definitely needs to take a more deliberate approach. And I think the reason that theirs is a little disjointed right now is because I think these sites were built independently of one another and a lot of the product pages and whatnot. So I think a little more deliberate and strategic approach, I think, and it would be a really good structure.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I was mainly curious because I'm working with Borderlands right now, and so I didn't know you had insight from previous research, so that's super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're interested, let me know. I can send you because this is not everything. I can send you more
Yeah,
stuff.
that would be great actually.
Yeah, for sure. Let me just give me a heads up.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Right. Any other questions? I know we're over time, so I want to respect everybody's time. All right, well, what you can do if you would like is feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or whatever. I'm available. I also do ADP list mentorship. So if you have other questions, hit me up. More than happy to answer anything. And thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That thing, but I also feel really weird waiting to speaker. I know the camera on, I can't see it very well. I was like, oh, that's good. All right. Ta-da. Thanks, everybody.
And the meeting.
Yeah, let me figure out how to do that. Darn. All right.